What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke, aka Dansgwait here, and welcome to what I'm hoping is going to be an entertaining set of Final Fantasy X videos for you guys. I spent a lot of 2022 playing Elden Ring and then eventually watching a lot of Elden Ring. And the amount of challenges that I saw being done for Elden Ring really reminded me of the good old days of Final Fantasy X. The thing that made me start the channel all those years ago back in 2008. Doing these wild challenges and trying to figure out ways through the game that hadn't been done before or that were at least very difficult to try and play. Alongside that, I released a video about Final Fantasy X being available on the Steam Deck, which is a great addition to the plethora of ways to play the game, but it also reminded me of some features that the Steam version of the game has, which I've always found kind of interesting, and I zoned in on one in particular. The first time I ever played on Steam, I noticed that there was this new boost/cheat added, which was basically auto battle. And I remember trying it and thinking, I wonder what they've kind of cooked up for this auto battle and how useful it actually is. And so I quickly found when I first started playing that all it basically does is just use the standard attack command over and over again. So it makes no differentiation about who's using it. It doesn't specifically target enemies that have less defense or anything like that. It's just a very, very simple way to automate the process of simply pressing X and attacking the enemy and doing nothing else. So I was like, come on man, how useful really is this? And so eventually this led me down the rabbit hole of just how far can you get in the game using auto battle only and nothing else. So before we even get too deep into it, I'll just say straight away the answer is not very far, but it did lead me on to what I considered a pretty interesting challenge, which is basically use auto battle whenever the game allows you to, which is actually quite a lot of it, including basically all random encounters and some of the bosses. Then, when you can't use auto battle, only use the attack command and just press X in the battles and do nothing else. And so your immediate reaction to this would be, well, all you have to do is just build a super OP run and you should be able to beat the game like that. And it is true to an extent, but there were some pretty interesting things that I've picked up until this point. As of recording this first video, I've made it up to Evray so far, and I decided to kind of document my progress and not try to do one single giant video of the entire game, because it has been fun and it's going to be a bit of a longer ongoing process because I have a lot of other things to work on. But since I've made it this far, I want to share with you my progress so far and the kind of roadblocks I've encountered and how I was able to overcome them. So that is going to be what I'm going to share with you, and this is the first part of that. So before we get going, let's run through the rules and what this is going to affect in terms of the run. So of course the first and most important rule is that you must use auto battle whenever it is available for you to use. And so the second rule is if it's not available, you can only use the attack command and you cannot select which enemies you attack. You just press X and the game generally does it from right to left. So whichever enemy is to the right of the party, they will be the one that gets attacked first and you will have no control of that. You simply press X and there is nothing more you can do in the battles until you win or you get a game over. So it sounds very simple, but of course these simple restrictions end up making the game a lot more complicated. So here's a few things that this is going to affect that could make things anywhere from interesting to very difficult to downright impossible. So the first of those is that this means that there's no escaping from battles. Every single random encounter you get into, you have to take it on and you have to make progress until you get some kind of no encounters equipment, which is pretty deep into the game. It also means that healing in battle is going to be very difficult because you're not allowed to use items, you're not allowed to use the use command, and of course you're not allowed to use magic to heal either. So you have to find more creative and a lot more limited ways to heal while you are in battle. You're not going to be able to use a Phoenix down on anybody because you don't have the ability to use items, and of course Auto Phoenix comes along way later into the game, so basically no revival for a big chunk of the game. It also means that until you get Auto Med, there's no healing of statuses in battle as well, so you have to try to get equipment that has some kind of protection, otherwise you won't be able to heal any negative status effects you pick up in the battle. There's going to be no steal or use, because of course we're only using attack or auto battle, so this means a huge amount of important items that I cannot farm by stealing, and it also means I cannot use them in battle either. It also means that there's no haste until I get SOS haste, and even then the first opportunity the game gives you is when you fight Wendigo after Seymour and Anima. And even then you only get one potential SOS haste armor, and then it's going to be very difficult to pick up any more haste type stuff for most of the game. You have no control over the attack order, with one caveat, which is if you're in a situation where you literally cannot make progress unless you manually select who you're attacking, then I'm going to allow being able to select an enemy. An example of this is Sin's Fin, because if you just leave auto battle on, you have the regenerating Sinspawn at the front, and you are just going to be basically just defeating those Sinspawn over and over again, and you get stuck in an impossible loop. So for that one, you have to manually be able to select the Fin or you can't make any progress. So in that situation, I will allow the use of enemy selection to be able to make it through. Of course, you're going to be relying only on physical damage, even against enemies that have tough armor or very high physical defense, where you should really be using magic, but you won't have a choice. That's going to make things quite interesting, and you'll already see pretty early on how that's going to affect things. And the final thing, which is very easy to forget, and it can very easily catch you out, is that in certain boss battles you have no control over the party members that get selected as your front line. So you're going to see a bit later on that that's going to play a pretty major role in one of the battles that we're going to have. So those are some of the ways in which you're going to be restricted, and those are pretty serious restrictions. So of course this is going to mean that we're going to have to think outside the box, do some power leveling when we can, and see if we can get through this game by just using auto battle or attack. Now originally the video idea was just to see how far you can go with auto battle, but that idea ended more quickly than I would have hoped, and so I turned it into attack only, and I looked it up to see if anyone had done this before. And I saw one person that has a video up to Tros, I think, and they didn't follow up at all. And I saw one person writing some blog posts up until Luca, I think, or something like that. So I have taken this all the way to Evray at this point, and it's looking good and it's looking like I can continue. But for this first video, I'm going to share with you some early progress and some things that I've been doing to try to get through with this challenge. So I hope you guys enjoy this. It's going to be something different. I do like going back to the old challenge routes because it's been a very long time. And I love the way it just gets me thinking about the game in a different way once again. Because there's just this beautiful simplicity about this challenge where it is literally just attack only or just mash X. But as a result, it leads to a lot of complicated situations where you have to figure out a way through. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get into it. I will be basically doing this in like an overview kind of format, showing you guys some stuff from the random encounters, showing you guys the bosses, doing some voiceover, and basically talking through how I've been making progress and the kind of issues I've been encountering and how I overcame them to continue my way through the game with these restrictions. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get going and see how I do with this challenge. So the first thing to mention is that I found a really cool cutscene remover tool. I think it's fairly recent, but it works pretty damn nicely. Basically allows you to skip all of the cutscenes in the game, which is really, really helpful. And that combined with the ×2 and ×4 speed of the Steam version has made things incredibly quickly. So you'll see in this little intro bit that there's this like special kind of intro screen so that you know that it's activated. And you'll see it in action as you're watching this. It's really, really cool. So I think it's someone called Eric T, something like that, that made it. I'll put their name in like a credit because it's a really useful tool. And thanks to them, I was able to save a lot of time during this run, especially for repeat attempts. So with that said, let's get going with the very first battle in the game. So literally, obviously the game starts in Dream Zanarkand and you face the first Sin Scales. And this one, auto battle works fine. Of course, it's the very start of the game, so there's pretty much zero risk. And with auto battle, you can just make your way through these guys and they're no problem at all. Now, the first time already where the run kind of technically ends is when you have Sinspawn Amez. Sinspawn Amez has a tutorial in it for the overdrive, and that means that auto battle is disabled. So already within like a few minutes of basically starting the challenge, you have auto battle disabled and you're not able to basically do it. So in this stage, again, you're forced to do the overdrive. So I do the overdrive with Oren, and then of course, because it is Sinspawn Amez, can't kill you anyway because it just uses Demi, and you can just use attack to kill Sinspawn, no problem. But yeah, already within literally the first few battles of the game, technically, if your question is, can you use auto battle and nothing else to complete the entire game? The answer is no. But there are going to be a lot of times, you're going to see it in the playthrough already, where I was using auto battle, even against pretty significant bosses, it's actually available to you. So that is definitely going to make things interesting, and it's definitely another layer of difficulty compared to, say, just having attack only. It really does change things when it's auto battle as well. So for now, so far so good, and I'm going to skip ahead to the first thing that could cause a little bit of a problem in this challenge. Just a quick note though, in the final battle that you do in Zanarkand where you have to knock that thing off the bridge and cause the explosion, Auto Battle can actually sort this out for you. I was wondering if it was able to kind of select it, but I think again technically because it's the furthest enemy on the right side of the screen, Auto Battle still works and you don't have to do anything, and you can actually make your way through this battle without having to manually select it. It's a minor detail because you'd be able to basically win anyway if you select it, but Auto Battle does work, so that was an interesting little tidbit early on. Of course, the battle against Geneaux, you can't lose that one anyway, so it's not that big a deal. You can skip ahead. Now, the first battle where you could have things going wrong is actually against Klikk, because normally, of course, what the game wants you to do is to use Riku's usability and use your grenades to take it out. But because of the rules of this challenge, we're not really able to make use of Riku's grenades. It forces you to throw the first one, but then after that we have to rely on our physical attacks. And that means that you can actually die in this battle. So if you just go in with the current rules that we have, you do actually have to rely on some RNG to even get through a battle this early in the game. So you guys are going to see here what happens where you just try to do it with just like regular or bad RNG and things don't go your way. This early on you can still fail and you can still get a game over. Because literally all you can do is attack, no potions allowed, and Riku's not allowed to use multiple grenades in the battle either. And of course she's very weak in terms of her physical attack. So when you put those things together, even Klikk can give you a game over pretty early on, and you could need a few attempts before you get the necessary RNG to win. And the necessary RNG here is basically for Klikk to choose its attacks in a way that doesn't kill Tidus, because he's the main damage dealer. Tidus to potentially land a critical hit or two, and sometimes he can evade Klikk's attack. So that's another thing that has to go your way for you to win this battle. It's definitely doable, and with a few attempts you should be able to get there. But already, due to the restrictions, things are a lot more dangerous than they would be. And of course, until you get to a point in this run where you can potentially just overpower everything, even with attack, and you don't need to heal and you don't need to do anything, it can actually be a more difficult challenge early on in the run than later on in the run. So we'll just have to see how things end up playing out. But even at this very early stage, there's dangerous bosses, and bosses that require some RNG and some luck, and of course some grinding as we move further forward too. So Klikk was the actual first challenge of the run. But of course eventually, with a little bit of RNG, you do end up beating it and it's not a problem. And then you can move on ahead to the underwater ruins section of the game. Now, one thing that I basically never ever do in the underground ruins, which I kind of remembered in this run because it did end up becoming more relevant, is that straight off the bat you can give Riku the plus 200 HP. Usually it's kind of not that necessary, but if you go to her sphere grid, of course, due to her position on the grid, she can actually activate that first health. And as a result of that, she obviously can take a couple more hits from the next boss, which is Tros, and that can make all the difference. When you're doing like an attack only / auto battle run, even being able to survive an extra couple of attacks is going to be beneficial to you. So yeah, I did activate that extra health sphere on Riku's grid because you're not going to get enough sphere levels to move her along any further, but having 560 instead of 360 was definitely helpful. And the piranhas of course give you the spheres necessary to do it. So that wasn't too much of a problem. So all I could really do here was kind of hang out for a little bit. Auto battle does take care of the piranhas, you don't have to worry about them, they're too weak to pose any kind of threat. And to heal, of course, you can just go back up to the salvage ship and use a save sphere to just get your points back. So it's not too big a deal, and through this you can move Tidus along the sphere grid a little bit, get him 2 or 3 sphere levels just to make things slightly easier, because he does have a +1 strength a few nodes down that could make things just a little bit easier. So with that in mind, Tros was the next boss battle, and like I say, again, it was actually a pretty tough one because early on your options are very limited and it's very difficult to be able to grind far enough to get any meaningful stat increases. So Tros was definitely a problem here. Once again, you're not allowed to auto battle in this one because of all of the trigger actions and all the different options that you can take. You're going to end up out of range for attacks, so auto battle can't handle that, and as a result you have to choose your moves manually. So with Tros, after a time, it's going to swim to the other side of the arena, and you have basically two choices. You can either use the trigger command, or you can defend. For me, I'm just going to defend because I don't have the option to attack, and I don't want to really select another move, and so defend is what I end up doing here. Now this battle is actually like a harder version of Klikk, because even if you give Tidus a few sphere levels, and you up Riku's HP to 560, this guy has 2200 HP, which is a lot for this stage of the game, if you're not using Riku's grenades. And because obviously due to the nature of the challenge, you can't benefit from the grenades here, so it's just purely attacks. And so once again, we are going to have to rely on some RNG here to make things work. But once again, giving Riku 560 and being patient and having enough attempts will land you the RNG necessary to win this battle. And once again, what I mean by RNG is Tros having attacks miss, choosing its attacks in a way that doesn't pick too much on Tidus, which allows him to stay alive, and also for Tidus to potentially land a critical hit as well. So in the background again, I will be showing some stuff from the failed battle and also from the successful one, but Tros was definitely one of those that early on did cause some trouble, and because grinding with the piranhas is so time consuming, it's not something I wanted to get into. As a general philosophy, I think for this, I'm basically trying to get through with the lowest stats that I can, and I'm only grinding obviously as necessary to defeat a particular boss. So of course you could approach this in a way where as soon as you get a point in which you can grind, you can just spend 10 hours grinding there and trying to become as OP as possible, as quickly as possible, and then seeing how far that takes you. But in the spirit of the challenge, I want to just see how reasonably you can actually do this without having to go crazy with the overleveling. Basically just get enough attack or HP or agility to be able to make it through, and what those kinds of thresholds are, where you only need a reasonable amount of RNG to get through. And I think Tros is one of those where, again, it's a reasonable amount, and to make it like so that you didn't require any RNG, it would have been absolutely hours and hours and hours of grinding, which at this really early stage would have just been silly, because I'm not even sure how far you can take the challenge. At this point, I wasn't even aware if you could, let's say, beat Sinspawn Gui with the challenge. And well, if you can't, then that's it. It makes most of the idea kind of redundant. So I didn't definitely want to go too hard on the grinding, and that's just generally how I've approached it for what I've done so far. So with all that said, yes, I did eventually get through Tros with some clutch RNG, and I was able to continue my way onto Besaid and get going over there. Of course, once you arrive in Besaid, Waka is now a party member, and in this challenge, in my opinion, Waka was going to be really important for the main reason that he has the best accuracy, and he's able to hit enemies that the other guys can't really hit. So he's that good mix of, he is a more physical attacker anyway, and he has the ability to hit a lot of stuff. So all of these like one-eyes, imps, all of those kind of enemies that can cause trouble for people like Tidus, Auron, and Kimahri, Waka I felt needed to be there. Of course, I remember that he gets a TKO as well, which is a hugely important weapon and will continue to be for this challenge as well, because one of the biggest things is that obviously you're not able to steal, which really limits your ability to gather items and resources to customize with. So drop farming becomes a much bigger deal in this challenge, and that's another thing we're going to be looking out for as we continue through. Because let's say you want Stone Touch, there is no stealing petrified grenades to be able to customize it. You have to defeat basilisks and hope that it drops one for you in Jose. Or you buy the TKO for Waka from Oaxaca. Wow, that's a line. Waka from Oaxaca in Oaxaca. And then once you do that, then that's obviously a way for you to get through battles more easily. So Waka is going to be a cornerstone of this challenge. And so in Besaid at least, things are relatively chill so far, and we won't need to worry too much until we get to Sin's Fin. I don't want the individual sections to be too dragged out because there's of course a ton of things to cover. And so for Besaid I will be skipping through a lot of stuff because you can just attack and make your way through. One of the tutorial battles in Besaid is the Garuda, and is designed for you to summon Valifor and to be able to use it. With this one, of course, because Valifor is pretty OP compared to Garuda, you can just summon as the game forces you to do, and just use attack with Valifor and kind of stay within the spirit of the challenge as well. Even though we had to use the summon move we're able to just use attack with the Aeon. And of course that gets you through the battle. So of course, unless it's absolutely forced, I will not summon, because that, even if I just use attack with the summon, it still breaks the idea of the challenge. So I won't be doing that in the game. But for this one, of course, we're forced, as it's a tutorial. You don't have a choice. And let's say against Isaru, I'll also be forced to doing the same thing. I'll see if I can defeat Isaru's Aeons just by using attack with my own Aeons. We'll just have to see. I should be able to manage if I level unit enough, but we'll just have to wait and see for that one. I haven't fought him yet as of making this video. But for now, Valifor obviously gets through very easily, and we can proceed. In Besaid, there is actually one really weirdly interesting battle, one that I would never in a million years have thought would end up being an issue, and it's actually the one after the Dark Attack tutorial. You face a trio. It's a preset trio designed to put together everything you've learned so far. So Tidus should attack the Dingo, Wakka should attack the Bird, and Lulu should use Thunder on the Flan. Now, because Auto Battle can be activated for this one, you don't do that. And so as a result, what it means is that your 3 characters have to physically hit this Water Flan and kill it. Normally, no problem. I mean, you should be able to get through this. It's not that big a deal. But for some reason, this one particular Water Flan has this mechanic of it actually uses water on itself to heal. It's something that I'd never really paid attention to before. And other than this battle, when you face the Water Flan in the future, it doesn't use water on itself to heal, and so it's absolutely fine. But with this particular battle, because of that mechanic, it's actually able to out-heal the damage that Yuna, Wakka, and Tidus are doing. And because this battle is basically like predetermined and preset to appear at this particular time, and in this particular way, it is actually a bit of a roadblock. I kind of struggled, and you can kind of lock yourself into a loop, well, not a permanent one, but a loop where your characters are attacking as best as they can, but this guy just heals for like 140, 150, and you can't break through. And all the time, because it can out-heal your damage, it gets to a point where it doesn't need to use water on itself, and so it uses on the party. So it is actually possible for this Water Flan to game over you, and again, you have to rely on some RNG to actually be able to defeat this guy at this stage. You need a few critical hits to go your way, and so if you're patient and you attempt this a few times, you can beat this Water Flan and continue to make progress. But it actually turned out to be harder than I was expecting, which was kind of funny. And like I say, it's unique to this battle. Once you get through this one, you don't have that problem. And the good news there is obviously once you're through, then you can actually start to do a little bit of grinding in Besaid to get a few more levels up, because they are actually going to be needed a little later, and I'll show you why in a second. As a general note, of course, this time around, because what you find in chests and what NPCs give you is a lot more important, I am making an effort to speak to as many NPCs as I can and to not miss any chests, so that I can get a few extra items and the odd occasional piece of equipment as well that could come in handy during the run. So it's something that I did definitely make sure I did. Even something like the Seeker's Ring, which gives Yuna some more HP, for example, before you get on the boat, can be useful. So that's the kind of thing that I'm making sure I'm doing as well. And this leads us on to the next boss battle, which is actually where any kind of dreams of auto battle or using attack only and not selecting any enemies has to end. And that is the battle against Sin's Finn. So when it comes to Sin's Finn, it's actually pretty interesting. Initially it tells you that auto battle is disabled, but later on you're actually able to turn auto battle on. Now this doesn't really change the outcome, because all your characters are going to do is incessantly attack the Sin Scales, and this battle really does break the whole, like, you know, auto battle, attack only, don't do anything else, that kind of thing. Because the party is predetermined, Wakka is not even in the lineup when you start. So that means that as of this point, attacking Sin's Finn is impossible. If you do auto battle, all you're going to do is attack the Sin Scales over and over again, and they're going to keep respawning, and that's going to be it, basically. Challenge over, game over, that's it, we're done, forget the video. But of course I'm not going to let it go like that. Sometimes you do have to bend and break the rules to keep things interesting and to be able to enjoy the rest of the game. So what I decided to do here was, because the game completely forced me into it and there was technically no way around it, I swapped Yuna for Wakka, of course, to get someone that could even hit Sin. And what I did was use Wakka to attack Sin's Finn, and Tidus and Kimahri continue the kind of auto battle-esque philosophy. So those two can only attack the Sinspawn on the right. They can't do anything further than that. but Waka has a license to be able to use attack on Sins Fin. Otherwise, we simply cannot make progress, and that's that. Now, this one is actually, again, potentially a big problem, because even if you do all of that stuff, this is one of the rare situations in the game where you have back-to-back battles, and you can't really heal in between. Now, normally, if you were doing some kind of challenge, and you knew that you had to fight Sinspawn Gui, or however you pronounce it, Uchilies, I don't know. But you know which one I'm talking about. If you knew that that was going to happen and you were in a challenge situation, you could of course have your party members that are going to participate in the battle, aka Tidus and Waka, be healed enough so that there wouldn't be a problem against that one. But with the restrictions that we have, we're not able to heal Tidus and Waka. So what we needed to do was basically survive 2 battles back to back without being able to heal at all. And I found in my first attempt that even if I could defeat Sins Fin, once I got to the next Sinspawn battle, it was just too much for me, and Tidus and Waka couldn't have enough HP to see the second battle through before they got killed. So this was the first point at which I decided to go back to Besaid, grind for some more levels so that I could be stronger and less likely to die, then come back and face the Fin again. Now for the grinding stuff, because they're random encounters and because auto battle does work against them, I did make sure I just used my auto battle, so I didn't kind of change things to help it benefit me. But of course, if there's one thing that auto battle helps with, it's literally like grinding for levels if you are strong enough to get by just using auto battle. And for Besaid, of course, that's not a problem for us, so we're able to do that, which was cool. So I did have to take a little bit of time, but it wasn't like an excruciating amount of grinding at all. I think maybe something like 15-20 minutes, maybe half an hour with times 4 speed, and we had enough levels to basically go back to this fight. And again, with a little bit of RNG where Tidus and Waka don't get picked on too much by the Sin Scales, you can have enough HP to make it through to the Sinspawn and give yourself a good chance of being able to win that battle. So I'm showing you guys now what kind of stats I had in order to beat the Sins Fin and Sinspawn battle back to back, and basically was far enough to give Waka 818 HP, and I took his strength up to 16 with agility 9. With this kind of challenge, it seemed to me like HP, strength and agility were generally the 3 kind of most important ones, and of course luck comes into it potentially a bit later on, but especially for most of the game, I think those 3 stats were the ones that were most important to get me through a battle, because agility basically affects the quote-unquote DPS, so the higher your agility, the more damage you're able to do for a given number of turns in the battle. So that's of course a very important stat, and of course strength and HP speaks for itself. So I did have to grind a little bit, but as you can see, it wasn't anything like some crazy mega grind, and those stats were already enough for me to get through this one, of course with a little bit of RNG help as well. Another reason why grinding is going to be useful in this challenge is because, as I've mentioned, finding equipment that's going to be useful to you is going to be tough, because you're not able to customize as effectively as you normally would. So this means that since you are going to be drop farming a lot more and benefiting a lot more from dropped equipment, when you grind, you're going to really up the chances of your inventory containing the kind of things that normally you wouldn't maybe potentially find as much. But let's say an enemy has a 6% chance of dropping something that you need. If you're grinding and you fight that enemy 50 times, then the odds of you ending up with a few of those in your inventory is going to be a lot higher. So it has like a double benefit. Not only are you increasing your stats and making a battle possible, but you're giving yourself a much better chance of getting equipment that's going to be useful to you in the run as well. And that did happen a lot during this playthrough. Something to note was that, of course, I switched auto battle off in order to be able to defeat Sins Fin, but you can actually switch auto battle back on for the next Sinspawn battle. So it is possible to do the next battle with auto battle as well. And so that's what I'm going to be showing on screen right now. Definitely got some solid RNG for this one as well. And because I came into the battle with such high HP from the previous one, and I also did get some good RNG in the form of critical hits, and the enemy kind of selecting the more favorable moves in terms of who they hit, it ended up actually being a pretty easy run against this guy. I could have probably had even lower stats and still won the battle, but it was definitely a solid run, and I could move on to Kilika and continue the journey. Once you get to Kilika, one of the most important aspects here is that Kimahri is of course going to become a permanent party member. Now this means that my primary party for this challenge is actually going to be Waka, Tidus and Kimahri. Even when Auron appears on the scene, Kimahri, due to the nature of his sphere grid, for once he actually benefits instead of losing out, and he becomes a pretty important player, especially early on in this challenge. Due to how versatile his grid is, it does have a decent amount of HP and strength available to him, so he's going to get to a point where he is physically quite strong, and he's a decent tank, and he's also going to be more agile than Auron is as well. So in pretty much all facets of this particular challenge, Kimahri is superior. Now, Kimahri's ace in the hole is also the fact that early on, one of the more difficult things is going to be, even if you try to grind for levels, your ability to kind of get out of your sphere grid is going to be limited. So, for example, it doesn't matter how much grinding you do for Yuna and Lulu, their strength is going to be very, very limited. And even for, let's say, Tidus and Wakka, if you can't break out of their sphere grid, or you're only traveling on their sphere grid or an earlier portion of it, their strength is also going to be relatively limited. But Kimahri has the benefit of being able to go into whichever sphere grid he wants eventually. All he needs is a level 1 key sphere, and he can join Tidus on his grid too, so he can double benefit from that as well. So for that reason, I'm happy to report that Kimahri is going to be a pivotal character in this particular challenge, because he is so often the one that gets ignored in playthroughs because people don't know what to do with him, and the other characters kind of end up being superior. Storyline wise as well, I mean, you generally have a greater involvement from the other characters too. So having a challenge where Kimahri is actually really useful is definitely a nice touch, and I did enjoy having Kimahri being a primary party member and an important figure for this one too. So Kilika is where that journey begins, and we have our established front line of Tidus, Kimahri, and Wakka. In terms of the fiends that you face here, they're not that bad at all, especially since I did a little bit of extra leveling in Besaid for the previous battles, and here, especially if you've managed to pick up some kind of elemental that they're weak to, that's already going to start to become useful. So, for example, you'll be fighting the water Flan a lot, and eventually, if you grind it enough, it's going to drop you some kind of water strike weapon, and that could be very useful against the gold element here. One thing I would recommend in this particular challenge is to basically have, when you have an element as a random encounter or a Flan, whatever the opposing element is, at least having one of your attackers with the opposing element is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of effort when you're using auto battle, because those guys are going to be the ones that are going to be really tanky and resilient if you don't have the opposing element especially. So that's the kind of thing that will definitely help you survive and help you continue to make progress during this auto battle / attack only challenge. But yeah, in general, Kilika was not too much of a problem, and the AP that it gives you, of course, helps you to grind a little bit further too, and to up your stats a little more too. So, I know what you're thinking. What about Lord Ochu? Did you manage to defeat Lord Ochu? And the answer is actually yes, but not initially. So my first attempt against Ochu didn't go so well, and I'm sure you guys can guess why. The reason why Ochu is so tough to defeat at this particular stage with this particular challenge is because it has Poison Claw, and if you don't have any poison protection, then you're not going to last very long in a battle where you're not actually allowed to heal. So that was of course a massive problem, and because he has 4,700 HP as well, it was definitely very tough. So I did give it a go. It didn't go so well, and ended up leaving Ochu initially before coming back a little bit later. So the first attempt against Ochu did not go well, but I did come back, and I kind of surprised myself a bit in actually being able to beat it. So I'll come back to it in a second. As I mentioned earlier, one of the most important things you need to do in this challenge is to make sure you drop farm certain things that are going to be useful to you in battle. And as mentioned, since Poison Claw is one of the biggest reasons why this battle is extremely difficult and basically almost impossible, finding a Poison Ward armor is pretty much critical if you want to defeat Ochu at this stage. And lucky for us, it can be done. So once you're sticking around here and you're grinding a little bit, getting your levels up, ready for the battles ahead, you can get a drop that has Poison Ward on it. And so if you pick up a couple of those at least, then you are going to have a shot at defeating Lord Ochu, which is going to be pretty fun. So I end up getting enough here to make that work, and Wakka ended up having a Serum Arm Guard, and I gave Kimahri a few more levels too, so that he was definitely much more able to get damage done in the battle. And with that, we were ready to try and take on Lord Ochu. So these are the stats I had when I was ready to take on Lord Ochu. Again, nothing super special here, no like mega grinding. Wakka with 1000 HP and 18 strength, Tidus with 920 HP and 19 strength, and Kimari with 1024 and 22 strength. Again, because of that early sphere grid, if you choose like the right paths with very few sphere levels, he can shoot up to around that 22 mark relatively easily and push ahead of the others. He also has a piercing weapon, which also means of course he is very useful. So that's why Kimari really is a hero in this particular challenge, and he ended up working really well for it. So with poison protection and also some water ward that I had dropped from the water Flan when I was grinding in Besaid, I was actually able to take this guy down. So he wasn't able to poison me as effectively. So surprisingly, I really didn't think even with these like I would be able to do it, because I thought I'd probably need a lot more poison ward protection. But even though it was only Waka that had it, that was already enough to take it down, which is pretty cool. So again, of course I had to rely on some RNG. It does depend on how often he picks on Waka. If Tidus and Kimari end up getting poisoned too early, it's just not going to work. But with the setup I had, and with the RNG as well, I was actually able to take down Lord Ochu too. So it was a surprising win, I will say that, but it was definitely worth it. Now, with Lord Ochu, there's something that's also worth mentioning. If you want to, you can grind Lord Ochu over and over again, like reload the save basically, until you get the rare drop. The common drop from Ochu is an MP sphere, and the rare drop is an HP sphere. Now you need to overkill to get 2, and you can of course just ignore Ochu if you want, and backtrack to it later to get 2 HP spheres, but I was thinking, you know what, it's probably not that necessary. So after defeating it first time, I was just like, forget it, I'm just going to keep the MP sphere and move on. I actually got a good drop from it as well. I ended up getting a Lucid Armlet for Kimari, which is Confuse Ward. And considering you're going to be facing random encounters that can confuse you, confusion is one of the most dangerous statuses in this run from random encounters. So confusion protection is something that you definitely want. There's a few like cornerstone things. I would say confuse protection is one of them. Of course, stone ward is going to be important. Poison ward can also be useful too. And having an elemental weapon that is going to be a counter to whichever elemental is in the area. So let's say if you're in Kilika and you have the yellow element, you're going to want at least one character with a water strike. When you're in Miihen and you're facing an ice element or a white element, you're going to want someone with a fire weapon if possible. So that kind of general stuff was definitely useful throughout the run. And well, goes without saying, if you can get stone touch, poison touch, sleep touch, all of that stuff, whatever you can find, it's all going to be useful to you in the run. So with Ochu out of the way, I was pretty confident that if I could beat Ochu, I should be able to take on the next Sinspawn as well, and it should be fine. So I raced straight up there and I continued with the run. This one doesn't have that much HP, and I thought it should be okay, but I was curious to see what would happen with the tentacles on either side. Like, would I be able to target them? But what happens in these situations, I found, is that auto battle focuses on whatever the main boss is and completely ignores any kind of peripherals on the side. Now, this is sometimes good and sometimes bad. In this battle, it wasn't a problem because they're pretty weak anyway. It wasn't that big a deal, and I could just focus on the main body and just basically pound it before those guys could do enough damage to take me down. And again, I had Water Ward as well, which was nice, and I had a Poison Ward too, so I got a bit of a lucky critical from Kimari as well, which did quite a lot of damage. And in general, it wasn't really that difficult, and I managed to pull through without too much of a struggle against this guy. So it was pretty smooth sailing here, and I could move on with the game where there would be a pretty big gap before anything meaningful as it pertains to the challenge would actually happen. So I got into the temple. I made sure I got Kimari's Destruction Sphere equipment because it has fire, ice and lightning ward on it, which is definitely very useful for random encounters and just as a general armor to have, because of course I can't customize it, and getting a drop like that from any kind of early game enemy is impossible. So it was definitely a very useful one that did help in the run. So my friends, let's talk Blitzball. Once again, Blitzball rears its ugly head, or for me at least, it's another opportunity to enjoy Blitzball, because you guys know me, I love my Blitzball. Now, in this challenge, of course, one of the most important stats is strength, because you're just going to be attacking over and over. So what does this mean? Any opportunity the game gives you to get a strength sphere, you better damn take that opportunity. And well, the first opportunity you have in the game to get a strength sphere is if you win the Blitz tournament in Luca. That means we're going to be making sure that we learn the Jack shot, because that's going to give us a better chance despite bad RNG in that match. And then when we go to Luca, we're going to make sure that we win that Blitzball match too. So once you've learned the jack shot and you arrive in Luca, there is actually another good opportunity to grind here, and I would definitely recommend doing so. The mechs here are pretty easy, and they do drop high potions and X potions as a rare drop. So hanging out here, picking up some extra levels for Tidus and Kimahri, and also potentially getting more elemental strike weapons and elemental ward armors is definitely a good idea. So hanging out here for basically as long as you want to is definitely a good strategy. Once again, I didn't spend hours here. I spent maybe again like 15-20 minutes tops, maybe 10 to 15 on ×4, and it breezed by, and I ended up picking up a lightning strike weapon for Kimahri, and it was something that I could of course use in the next battle against a Blitzerator. So I had Tidus with his stunning steel, which I brought from Awaka, and I had Kimahri with lightning strike, and that meant that a Blitzerator was not that big of a threat, and I was able to take it down without needing the crane. And despite the fact that I had a very slow and very physically incapable party member in Lulu. Unfortunately, Lulu is going to be the party member that is the absolutely worst equipped to be useful in this challenge. She has very low HP, she has absolutely horrible agility, and she has terrible strength. So those three things basically make her the worst candidate possible. And well, to boot, she has one of the worst accuracy stats as well. So all in all, Lulu is unfortunately going to be pretty much totally ignored in this challenge, unless she's mandatory to be in the front line for a particular battle, like she is against a Blitzerator. But thankfully, her being there didn't cause us too many issues, because Tidus and Kimahri had the stats and the equipment to take down a Blitzerator without too much issue. And with that, it was on to the final against the Luca goers and making sure I beat those guys for the Strength Sphere. It actually ended up being a fairly tight match. The Luca goers, depending on their RNG, can be extremely difficult to beat, and sometimes just downright impossible. If the game doesn't want you to beat them, it can make sure that that happens. And so I had a tough time against them this time, but I did manage to pull through 2-1, thanks in part to, of course, the jack shot and some favourable RNG when it actually mattered. And so with that, I was able to get the Strength Sphere, and that, especially at this early stage, a +4 strength is going to be very useful. So before all of that, of course, there were a few mandatory battles that we had to do, but it wasn't anything too difficult. Auto battle can get you through those. And before you know it, you find yourself on Miihen Highroad with Auron in your party as well, and we have a pretty long road to go down, so we'll see how we deal with the random encounters along the long and annoying Miihen Highroad. One of the earliest decisions I had to make that felt pretty difficult was to decide who gets the Strength Sphere here. I didn't want to give it to Kimahri because he already has a decent amount, and he'll be able to move on to Tidus' grid eventually to get even more strength. Waka, I felt like he was more of a he would be useful using his TKO and that kind of thing, and so I wanted to give it to Tidus because I knew that Tidus was going to be in the party pretty much for every single battle possible, and even the mandatory battles where the game pre-selects who's in the party, Tidus is always in those. So as a result of that, it felt like he was the best choice, but due to his current position on the sphere grid, I wasn't able to actually give it to him then, so I kept the Strength Sphere in reserve until Tidus moved next to an empty node, and then I gave him the Strength Sphere later on. So now it's actually time to talk about something genuinely important in this challenge, and it's something that a lot of people will either not know about or completely overlook or not consider wasting time on. But for this particular challenge, it actually blows the entire challenge wide open. Now, you might have already guessed what I'm talking about, but in case you haven't, I'm actually talking about Blitzball once again, because there is something very interesting about the rewards that you can get from playing Blitzball at this extremely early stage of the game. Now, if you ever tried to play Blitzball this early, you might have been lucky enough to see something like a Dark Matter appear as a league prize. And so at this stage, like, what can you even do with a Dark Matter? You can't really do much until you get Riku at the very least. But there is actually a league prize which you can do a lot with, and that is the Teleport Sphere. So if you go into the Blitzball menu and you don't see it as a reward, you can keep resetting data until you see a Teleport Sphere appear as the top prize in a Blitzball league. And well, what does that mean? That of course means that from the get-go, pretty much, I mean, Miihen Highroad is so early in the game, you can teleport all of your characters to different portions of the sphere grid, and that is absolutely huge, and that will completely destroy the balance of the game and potentially the challenge of the game if you're willing to grind hard enough. So if you are willing to do, let's say, 5 or 10 Blitzball leagues in which you gain a teleport sphere every single time, then you are going to be able to move Kimahri over to Tidus's grid, and you can literally just set up one sphere grid, move all of your characters to it from the start of the game, and move everybody along together, and completely kind of just blow open the game. And so it was the kind of thing where I was like, I know I can do this, but it felt too much kind of... It was too much. It was too much breaking of the game, and I wanted to try my best to avoid something like this. So it's definitely something you can do, and if there's a situation where I feel completely roadblocked unless I'm able to access more of the sphere grid, then I will invoke my kind of Blitzball teleport sphere card. But provided I can even make it as far as Beacon L, then I should be able to get a couple of them there anyway. So for this run, for now, I won't be using this this trick. It's, well, I mean, who makes the rules anyway? It should be perfectly legal to do this if you're willing to grind it, because at the end of the day, the game gives it to you as a prize. If you want to obtain it and you want to use a teleport sphere at this early stage to benefit the run, then of course you can do whatever the hell you want to do. But for me, I decided to go against that because I thought it just... For me, part of the challenge was, of course, seeing what I could do by keeping the characters on their own sphere grid for the storyline portion of the game, except for Kimahri, who's designed to break out of his sphere grid anyway. So that was my whole kind of rationale, but teleport spheres and Blitzball was definitely one of the most interesting kind of things I came across early on in the game, and it really can change the entire complexion if you decide to go for it. But I didn't in this run, so it was time to try to take on Miihen Highroad and see if I could make it through. Stats wise, I was already looking pretty good because I had been doing a few little grinding sessions here, and so once again, Kimahri, Tidus and Waka were the main team. I had my red armlet for Kimahri, which was able to help me against the elements that I'd be facing on Miihen. We have the white element, of course, with the ice attack, and we have bombs that do fire damage, so being able to protect against both of those was definitely useful. I kept Tidus' stunning steel because, especially against stuff like jewel horns, I felt like it was probably a useful thing to be able to slow them down. And in terms of armor, he had a sleep ward, which would be helpful against the wolves. And for Waka, I decided to go with his poison ward armor. And in terms of weapons, I managed to pick up a poison touch weapon for him during the grinding, and we decided to go for that. So that was the setup I had early on, and I decided to kind of make my way through to see how long I could survive on the high road. So even though he had the red armlet, I was actually curious about SOS Nullfrost. I picked up a nice SOS Nullfrost armor from the mechs in Luca, and I felt making him completely immune to ice damage, because there's a lot of white elements on Miihen Highroad, I thought maybe that would be better, so that was the thing I went for first of all. Once again, on the high road, I made sure I spoke to as many people as possible, because you do get a few bits and pieces from them. So in general, on the high road, what I quickly noticed was that having Kimahri with elemental protection was actually maybe not the best idea. And the reason for that is because very quickly I encountered the Evil Eye enemy. Those guys can cause confusion, and if there's one thing you don't want in a situation where you have auto battle and you can't control anything, you're completely hands off, is to have 3 physical attackers being confused. So the less confusion you have, the better. So once I realized that I was going to be facing a lot of those evil eyes and dealing with confusion, I decided to give Kimahri his lucid armlet to protect him from potential confusion anyway. But thankfully, even though I didn't have a fire weapon, I was still strong enough to be able to defeat the white element. And because I could pretty much one-hit KO the other enemies, other than the jewel horn, it actually wasn't too bad on the high road, and I was able to make my way through. Now, again, this is an important caveat here, and it's a bit of a kind of choose your own strictness level of the challenge. For me, I'm only kind of concerned about what goes on in battle, and so what I did do was use Yuna's Cure outside of battle to heal my guys up again, because if you don't do that, then you have to really excessively farm for high potions and that kind of thing, and it felt like it would just drag out the battle, and I decided to just let Yuna heal them outside of it, just to speed things up and keep the run a bit smoother because I wanted to just focus on what goes on in battle as opposed to what you can do in the menu. Based on what I've seen so far, I am pretty sure it's possible to do it without using Eunice Cure in the menu, but it would just take a lot more it would take a lot more item farming, potentially guild farming to keep buying more high potions, getting a bit of luck with RNG in terms of what encounters you're going to face from one save sphere to another, all of that kind of stuff. So it does add a different dimension, and if you ever try doing it yourself, you could take it even another step higher by doing that, but it wasn't something that interested me for this particular one, so I did allow for healing in the menu outside of battles. And so eventually, before long, I was actually able to make it all the way to Chocobo Eater, and I was feeling pretty good about myself at this stage. We did have the Stunning Steel, which was already pretty useful, and it would be able to slow Chocobo Eater. Kimahri has a piercing weapon, which does better damage, of course, because he's a tough customer, and so Kimahri was definitely going to prove useful there. And so the three guys, with their abilities and the fact that I had been grinding a little bit at this point, I did feel like I had a decent chance of beating the Chocobo Eater. Along the high road, I think probably one of the only annoying things was, of course, the Jewel Horn, but I did have a Poison Touch weapon, which helped do a bit of extra damage against those guys, and so it wasn't too bad. They don't appear alongside particularly annoying enemies, so again, it wasn't something that caused me too much issue, and I was able to power through with the boys and make it all the way to Chocobo Eater. What I did do before attempting Chocobo Eater was make sure Tidus got far enough along the grid that he was next to an empty node, and this was where I could use the Strength Sphere that I picked up from Blitzball, and also an HP Sphere that I found in a chest in Luca. So I really was focusing on Tidus to be my most strong and ever-present powerhouse throughout the run. So he was up to 1200 HP and a massive 25 strength for that point in the game. So Tidus is naturally pretty high agility and decent strength growth across his grid, plus the fact that I was going to be feeding him all of the extra strength spheres and many of the HP spheres that I found did really end up making Tidus powerful in this run so far. So especially against Chocobo Eater, having those kind of stats was definitely useful to me, and so I got him as ready as I could for the battle ahead. Waka, of course, by this stage was lagging behind. They had the same HP, but he only had 18 strength, and Kimahri was still on 22 with 1200 HP. So the three of them had 1200 HP and 25 strength, 18 strength, and 22 strength respectively. And that proved to be enough to defeat Chocobo Eater. In terms of equipment, before going in, I would have loved to have got a Fire Strike weapon, but during all of the grinding that I did so far, I didn't encounter a single Fire Strike weapon, which was a little bit frustrating. But honestly, I didn't want to go back and farm for it, so I wanted to just try it out and see how I managed. So Tidus had his Stunning Steel in order to slow down Chocobo Eater, which of course helps a lot. Kimahri had the Hunter Spear that he picked up from one of the NPCs, and I put on the red armlet just to provide a little bit of extra protection from the blizzard that he uses when he's knocked on his back. So the battle itself actually played out pretty beautifully, better than I expected. I managed to get the poison to work on Chocobo Eater, and I got the slow to work as well, and so that already put us on the front foot. This was a battle where, again, Kimahri in terms of damage is the standout because he has the piercing weapon, and he has a decent amount of strength too. So it really does make a difference. Piercing is huge. Like Tidus was doing around 130 damage per hit, and Kimahri was doing almost 3 times as much damage, even though he had 3 less strength points, because of course he had the piercing weapon. So that's really huge, and it's just another reason why Kimahri is going to be such an important cornerstone of this battle, because if you want Tidus to have a piercing weapon, you have to use level 2 key spheres, and to be honest, that's going to take a while for you to get in the game. And so by that point, Kimahri would have to be the primary, and most of the time only, character that has piercing in the front line. So yeah, that was the deal, and eventually the boys actually did well enough to knock him off the cliff. So it was a rare occasion where I managed to knock Chocobo Eater off the cliff. It was pretty epic. And so as a result, I ended up winning myself 2 level 1 key spheres, which was really nice to have at this early stage of the game. So that was Chocobo Eater, and then from there on it was fairly smooth sailing all the way up to the first genuinely legit show-stopping challenge of the run. So I'm going to skip through fairly quickly here in terms of the random encounters. Auto Battle did its job, and the boys had the right stats and equipment to be able to push through the rest of Miihen Highroad, and also Mushroom Rock Road. In terms of what we encountered on Mushroom Rock, I did have Tidus with a weapon that had Ice Strike on it, so that made the red element much easier. We did have some petrification issues, but in general we were strong enough to deal with things, and that lizard generally got taken out quickly enough that it wasn't a problem. The only thing that would have been a bit of a better outcome would be if the red element didn't appear furthest on the right from the party's perspective, because it meant that until we took out the red element, the lizard in the middle was able to land a few hits, so it was a little bit of a problem, but nothing that really caused any game overs or any problems, and so thankfully I was able to push through and make it to Sinspawn Gui without too much issue along the road. So, once I made it to Operation Miihen, of course Owaka was waiting there, and as a result of my grindy playstyle this time around, I had a lot of gil to play with. That meant I could buy the Avenger, which has counterattack, which again, for a challenge like this, is huge, because any extra opportunity to do damage is going to be very, very useful. I did buy the TKO as well, of course, for obvious reasons. And looking around in general, I made sure I brought the Lucid Arm Guard as well, because as you've seen, confusion can be a big problem in this challenge. So at this point I had both Kimahri and Waka with confusion protection, which would serve me well in the future. So I was trying to set myself up for Sinspawn Gui as best as I could. I really didn't know what to expect, like what was the auto battle situation like? Would Waka potentially automatically be able to target the head? And if not, what would I do to be able to get through this battle in a way that stays kind of faithful to the philosophy and the idea of the challenge? So without much further ado, let's get to Sinspawn Gui, and that was definitely a bit of an adventure. So in terms of setup, I went for the Avenger for Tidus because Sinspawn Gui is immune to slow, unfortunately, which would have helped me a lot, but I didn't have it, so I decided to just go for the Avenger. Any extra hits that you land, of course, is going to be very beneficial. For Waka, I just gave him an HP plus 5% that he had, and in terms of weapon, there wasn't really too much he could do. It's immune to a lot of things that you could potentially inflict on it anyway. And for Kimahri, he had his Hunter Spear and the red armlet to deal with the Thunder Spell that Sinspawn Gui has. So with that, I went into the battle and hoped for the best. So of course the first thing I noticed was that auto battle is enabled in this battle, strangely. Now this is actually bad news because it means that what these guys do on auto battle is to attack the core section. It means you're not able to defeat the head. Waka doesn't automatically attack the head, and it means that because you don't take out the arms first, you are basically doing an impossibly low amount of damage, and because you can't take out the head, you have to deal with the Venom move, and Venom is going to inflict poison, and so basically it means that the battle is essentially impossible unless you really just grind so hard that you probably spend tens of hours, maybe even hundreds of hours potentially, to do all of the Blitzball leagues necessary to basically get everyone to a high enough strength level where even with the two arms guarding, you're able to do enough damage to take out 12,000 HP, and you farm for a bunch of poison walled armors. And so as a result of all of these things, it just doesn't work with auto battle because you can't target the head. So we had a similar situation to what we had with Sin's Fin. We needed to basically bend the rules here to be able to beat this boss and to make progress. So the first thing I had to do was concede the fact that I can't use auto battle for this one and to switch over to attack only to see if I could manage with just attack. So I came back with a vengeance and ready to try and defeat this thing using attack only. So let's have a look at how that worked out. And so Sinspawn Gui in the challenge so far is the one where I had to basically break the most rules. It was still attack only, but I had to target the arms first in order to actually make things possible. And so Kimahri and Tidus would attack the arms, and Waka would focus on the head. Now, despite all of this stuff, Sinspawn Gui is a beast, especially for this section of the game, like relative to the levels that you have for your characters. The punch hits very hard, we're talking like 700 damage there. And obviously the fact that it has so much HP and it's going to take so long to take out, and you're not using your summons, and potentially Lulu can have level 2 like Fyra at this stage. You're not making use of those kinds of things, and you're also not healing. When you put all of those things together, Sinspawn Gui is a really hard battle in this challenge, and so it's going to cause a lot of problems. And so it didn't take long before I realized that by the time Waka's able to take out the head, it already uses Venom multiple times. And basically any battle in which you have a punch that does 700 damage, you're being hit by Venom, you're being hit by Demi, and you're being hit by Thunder too, these guys were nowhere near strong enough to survive this onslaught. And so we had to figure out a way to clear out that head before it basically took the rest of us out. And so this meant I had to go back to the drawing board, and I had to do some more legit grinding to get Waka strong enough to be able to defeat the head and give ourselves a chance at actually beating this thing. So once again, it fundamentally comes down to how you want to approach this challenge. Since we already have to bend the rules to be able to select the head and attack that manually, for me it seemed like a reasonable kind of middle ground was to have Tidus and Kimahri attack the arms to be able to take them out and then focus on the central core. Because even with that, it was still going to take a lot of grinding and some RNG to be able to pull through. Now, again, you can take this a whole other level further and say, you know what, I'm going to do this challenge in a way where I'm going to have Kimahri and Tidus not target anything specific. Only Waka can target the head. Tidus and Kimahri have to focus on the central part of the body only. Now, that to me is just like, that is a truly masochist and just insane way to do it. Like, if you use Final Fantasy X editor and you give yourself like a buttload of experience points or like basically sphere levels to get through, then sure, fine. You can theoretically see how this works. But to grind in Mushroom Rock long enough for Tidus and Kimahri to do enough damage to Sinspawn Gui's body while it has the two hands blocking, which gives it an incredibly high defense stat. Basically, if you can grind far enough to do that, then you can probably just blow out the entire rest of the game, and once again, it's basic challenge over. I didn't have the time to do something like that anyway, and even if I did, if I wanted to kind of turn this into a theoretical kind of challenge, I thought if I kind of show you guys how this is done, then it's just gonna be a bit of a lame ending. It's gonna be like, oh, you know, I grinded in Mushroom Rock for the equivalent of 100 hours, and then I broke the game, and then that was that. It felt like a kind of not a fun way to do it. So I decided to try and do it this way because it was, again, that nice middle ground of using attack only while still dealing with the challenges that I put in place, and it still being a reasonable amount of grind, and I can still get through it. So with the ×4 speed and with the way I want to do the challenge, because drop farming is important, what equipment you get during these grinds can really affect how things go. And that's another reason I didn't want to just say, oh, I edited in like 10 sphere levels in Final Fantasy X editor and this is what my stats look like now, because that wouldn't be a genuine representation of what I've dealt with. So I wanted to make sure that every single minute of this run was done in the game's real time, meaning yes, I would use ×4, but I wouldn't go into any kind of editor program to give myself anything. I wanted it all to be legit on that front. So I did take some time and I did work on my levels a bit, and I did grind in Mushroom Rock until I felt like I was strong enough to potentially take out Sinspawn Gui. So this is the biggest kind of spell of grinding that I've done so far, but it was absolutely necessary to be able to defeat Sinspawn Gui because he is a really tough customer, and since Waka's the only one that can do damage to the head in this challenge and we can't heal, we had a lot of work to do. So now it's time to show you the fruits of my labor, and my stats are definitely looking different. There's only 4 hours and 41 minutes on the clock though. This is what I mean. With the ×4 speed, you can really get a lot of grinding done in a little amount of time. So this is what I mean by reasonable amount of grind. So far I'm at Mushroom Rock Ridge, and thanks to the cutscene remover and the ×4, I've only been playing for 4 hours and 41 minutes of time in the game. So these are what my stats look like heading into Sinspawn Gui and what the sphere grid looks like too. So Tidus has definitely got a lot more HP, but his strength kind of acquisition has slowed down because he did use his +4 strength, and that particular part of the sphere grid doesn't have a lot more strength, so he got stuck at 27. Meanwhile, Kimahri caught him up at 27 and managed to go all the way up to 2044 HP. So I basically completed Kimahri's sphere grid at this point, and I started to move him onto Tidus's grid as well. Now what I did do in the meantime was swap in Yuna as well to give her a little bit more stats too, because what we also know is that for the second battle we've got Seymour, Yuna and Auron, and so we need to make sure those guys can survive long enough to beat the second form as well. So by the time I'd already grinded enough for Tidus, Waka and Kimahri, we were at a stage where we could swap in someone like Yuna or Auron, and those guys, even though they were at very, very base stats, we were still able to defeat those guys and able to grind them up too. And so without a too painful amount of grinding, I felt like I was ready to face Sinspawn Gui and see if I could beat it and then of course see what happens in the second battle and see if Auron and Seymour basically have enough physical attack to take out the second version of Sinspawn Gui. Because normally, of course, what you do is have Seymour use his level 2 spells and just completely obliterate it. But even Seymour has to use the attack command. He's not exempt, so we'll just have to see how that one ended up playing out very soon. Right then, let's get to the successful Sinspawn Gui battle. By this stage, because of my stats, I was able to survive more of the punches, and Waka was now doing over 400 damage to the head with each hit, and that meant that if he did get lucky and land some criticals, we were doing about 800 damage, and that meant I could kill the head a lot more quickly than I could in the previous runs. And so with this kind of battle, especially speed is of the essence, because if you take too long, then you're going to get punched too many times. So Waka basically needs to time his attack so that venom never happens, and then we take out the head, and then we also need to basically take out enough of the body's HP that it gets over that early phase where it uses punch more often. In case you weren't aware, Sinspawn Gui's AI is basically programmed in a way that when it's at full HP, it uses the punch more often, but as it gets closer to 0, it actually ends up using Demi more, which is of course what we want, because that punch is really powerful. And even with these stats, these guys would not be able to survive that many punches. I mean, when you get Demi thrown in now and then as well, effectively each character maybe has about 2 punches that they can survive, tops. And considering how much damage we have to do to the head and the body, it just wouldn't have worked very well. So in the final battle, you're seeing Titus and Kimari are doing about 600 to 700 damage on the body when the arms are not there to protect it. And of course, that means that when you land a critical, it's really nice, big, chunky damage. But despite all of this, you're going to see, I mean, it was a really close battle, and it definitely could have gone either way. It was a few kind of crucial critical hits that came in, which really did help to save me. And Titus evaded a punch as well at one point, which definitely did help, especially since he's the guy with counter-attack, which allows him to do even more damage in that particular situation as well. So in general, things did work in my favor in terms of RNG, and I did manage to take it down, but it was difficult. I did fail quite a few times, and it did take a decent amount of grinding to be able to get to this stage. But I was kind of proud of this win because, yes, of course, the rules had to be bent quite severely to be able to make it through, but the alternatives were to either completely give up or to break the game in such a ridiculously grindy and unrealistic way that it would have, in my eyes at least, it would have ruined the whole rest of the challenge. So that's why I decided to give up on it. So after defeating it, I was curious to see how I'm supposed to deal with the second form, because of course you guys are already thinking, well, who the hell's going to attack the head? Seymour can't attack it physically, Auron can't attack it physically, and Yuna can't attack it physically. So once again we get to another one of these like insurmountable problems where essentially, technically, the challenge ends. There's nothing you can do about that situation. But of course, in the name of continuing the challenge and having fun, we are going to bend/break the rules to be able to make it through without completely destroying the spirit of the run. So once we get to the second battle, there's only really one thing that you can do here, and that is to summon. So what I am going to do again is to summon Valifor and use Valifor to only defeat the head. So that's the only reason Valifor is going to be used here. Still going to only use attack, of course, but there's nothing that I could have done here that would have worked, because you just cannot target the head. It's impossible. So we needed to summon in order to make this whole thing work. Seymour and Auron were actually pretty funny. Seymour does a decent amount of damage. I was actually really surprised. I never used Seymour to really attack physically. He does about 270 damage, and on a critical he can do 550 or so damage to the arms. And so because I did work on Auron a little bit too, with about 3 attacks I was able to take out the arms. So I started off with Valifor, used attack to take out the head, dismissed Valifor, and then basically just used physical attacks the rest of the way and hoped for the best. And thankfully it was enough to pull through, because it was another situation where basically Yuna was in the party but was completely useless other than being able to potentially absorb some punches. Thankfully, because the punches are so weak in this second form, it wasn't too bad, and Seymour's relatively high strength, considering the fact that he's a mage, definitely helped to make a difference. So Auron was doing about 450 to 500 damage to the body, and Seymour was doing about 300-ish, and so when you put that together, thankfully it wasn't too painful, and I was able to defeat far and away the hardest boss so far in this challenge and continue my journey. I did end up getting an alert shield as a result, and that alert shield had sleep proof on it, which was a really nice drop from the boss. Okay, so with that, I think I will start to conclude this first part, having defeated the first kind of real roadblock that did require some more serious grinding to be able to get through. But get through we did, and we can now continue the journey and start heading towards some serious battles that are going to happen in Macalania. So I will wrap up here, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I didn't want to do this one with like live standard commentary because honestly, when I was starting out, I had no idea where the challenge was headed. I thought this could last like 2 hours and then I have to stop because there's a really ridiculous roadblock that I completely have to basically break the challenge for, and then that would kind of take away the whole point of making the video. And so I wanted to make something that, let's say the entire thing took 30 hours to do. A lot of it is going to be kind of farming, grinding, using auto battle to get through a certain area of the game where I can show a few encounters, you guys get the point, and I don't need to do as much. And so I decided to do this sort of format where I would record everything beforehand, do a voiceover, and then basically match the background footage according to however much time I needed to explain what I was doing for a particular section. So that's the kind of format I've gone for, and I didn't want to make the videos super long. I could have tried to do like one massive video for like the entire game. Honestly, to make it fit in one video, let's say like an hour long, 90 minutes long tops, I would have had to cut out so much of the context and of the explanation, and well, the boss battles would have had to have been really short highlight versions where I'm kind of skipping around and removing big chunks of it. So this felt like a nice hybrid where I wouldn't have to do some kind of big long walkthrough style thing, because I do have other plans for a Final Fantasy playthrough that's going to be much more of a standard walking through format that I'm going to do as live streams next year. But for this particular one, I just wanted to have a few videos of it, maybe 2 videos, maybe 3, maybe 4, something like that. Just like a mini series, like a Netflix sort of mini, like 6 to 8 episodes, absolutely tops kind of series that you guys can enjoy in your free time, that wouldn't be too dragged out in terms of being like a 2, 3, 4 hour giant single segment video that most of you guys are not going to have the time to sit through and watch, because I do know the demographics of the channel, and most of us are of a similar age where we have a lot of studying to do, we have a lot of work to do, or we have families, and so it's never easy to even sit down and watch like a half-hour LP episode or like a 1 hour LP episode, let alone something that's like 2, 3, 4 hours long. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this format, something slightly different to what you're used to. And in the next video, I am going to be continuing the journey and going up to Seymour and Anima at the very least. Depending on the runtime, I might take it even further, but you will definitely see at least up to Seymour and Anima, which was a pretty interesting battle indeed. So if you have enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like, it definitely does help. And if you want to take it a step further and get some early access to videos like this one in the future, and even more perks depending on your tier of subscription, please do check out my Patreon. It supports the channel massively and you guys get some pretty cool perks in return. So do check that out if you are so inclined. Thank you all for watching, guys. I will see you soon. Take care.